Welcome to tonight's installment in our lecture and film series Black Atlantic Cinema, which is entitled Nollywood and the Black Atlantic. And the film we're going to talk about and screen is Confusion Noir by Kenneth from 2013. A film that, when it first was made, was sort of unusual for the Nigerian film industry at the time, but has become quite influential since then. It won a lot of awards and was on Netflix for a certain moment, but it's no longer on Netflix, which is good so that we can screen it here. It's a film that was clearly made for the cinema, as you will see when you see it on screen, but it's a film that has a narrative style and the construction that is a bit unusual for a Nigerian film at the time. It's also unusual, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, because like Nigerian films always have a moral lesson at the end, and this one is about the question of whether or not there can be a useful moral lesson at the end of the film. So it's in a way a bit unusual. We are honored to have tonight with us the star of the film. No? Yes.
Sure, I'll take it.
Okay. The star of the film, Tunde Aladese, who is also a writer and screenwriter, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit more. She carries the film, as you will see, but she's sort of an accidental actress who is mostly a writer and will tell us about it. And we're going to introduce the film in a conversation between Didi Cheeka, me and Tunde in just a second. Why do we talk about Nollywood in a series entitled Black Atlantic Cinema? First of all, Nollywood is sort of an umbrella term and an omnibus term for a relatively complex set of filmmaking practices and activities that are spread out across the entire territory of the nation-state of Nigeria. Nigeria, you will probably notice, is the most populous country in West Africa, or in Africa, period. It's a country that has a high degree of linguistic and ethnic and religious diversity. It's the only country in the world that has about similar shares of the population that are Muslim and Christian. The north is Muslim, the south is Christian. And it's a country with very rich artistic traditions dating back centuries and thousands of years, actually, and a country that put itself on the map of global popular culture in the 1960s with a particularly musical style, Afrobeats, of which the most famous star was Fela Kuti, whose many sons and offspring are still very active in the Nigerian music scene. Nigeria was probably the only country in Africa that had, for a moment at least, a relatively well-functioning state-supported film industry in the 70s and 80s. It was one of the postulates of the third cinema movement as it came out and started spreading across the global south in the late 60s and early 70s, that filmmaking should be encouraged and supported by the government, by the state in post-colonial nation states, partly in order to keep it away from market logics and from keeping away from too much over commercialism. And you could say that Nigeria was the one place in Africa where that actually happened for a time. There was there still is a state agency for film production. There was a national film archive. There was a lab. And that agency produced celluloid 35mm fiction films that were actually shown in theaters, but didn't get a whole lot of distribution because they had to compete with Indian films and American films and Chinese, Hong Kong films in particular. And theater owners preferred to show these films rather than Nigerian homemade films. That industry broke down in the early 90s because of austerity measures imposed by the International Monetary Fund. So the Nigerian government had to cut back in various places, and one place where they did cut back was film production. And suddenly Nigeria was a country with an undersupply of filmed entertainment. And what happened then is that a group of very entrepreneurial salespeople, actually, traders whose main business was selling electronic entertainment equipment, particularly VCRs, video recorders, stepped in and started producing video-based fiction films, originally primarily with the intent of selling more VCRs. So the idea was to have locally produced films that told local stories for a local audience that would then be induced to buy a VCR to watch more of these films. These entrepreneurs solved the problem of distribution that the government hadn't been able to solve by using existing piracy networks that have been established all across the country for the distribution of pirated American films. And partly because the versions of the American films that circulated through these piracy networks were like fourth, fifth generation VHS tapes, where you still had a soundtrack but didn't get much of the image. The Nigerian films, which were basically shot with a VHS camera in domestic settings, modeled on, among other things, Brazilian soap operas, were able to compete because there was no discernible quality difference between the fifth generation pirated Hollywood film and the all new and fresh VHS copy of a Nigerian film at the time. And so in the early 90s, these video films started appearing and suddenly became hugely popular in Nigeria. It led to the development of various regional language film industries, including the Hausa film industry in the north of Nigeria. These films started circulating beyond Nigeria, in the Caribbean, all across West Africa to South Africa, first brought to these places by migrant communities, Nigerian expats, but then they caught on with other audiences, to the point where Victor Okoye, one of the filmmakers active in this industry, once said about Nollywood, what the Americans did to us in the 60s and 70s, we're doing to the rest of Africa now. We're the new cultural imperialists. Everyone is watching our films, and basically people are copying our fashion styles and interior decoration that they pick up from the films. And it's, you know, all of a sudden there was a functioning cultural industry that had basically emerged from nothing, certainly emerged without state support or intervention. And the state only belatedly got back into the game, trying to support and regulate, positively regulate the industry. But it's essentially an entrepreneurial phenomenon driven by a very, very strong response from the audience. The film we're going to see tonight is one that was made by a young filmmaker who'd gone to the National Film School of Nigeria in Jos, Kenneth, and had an idea for a film that didn't catch on with producers in Lagos, but he managed to get some screenwriting support from the Hubert Bals Fund of the Rotterdam Film Festival, wrote the screenplay, and that's when the story would have ended because the money ran out. And then what happened was that one of the big stars of Northern Nigerian industry, Ali Nuhu, who is now the head of the Nigerian Film Corporation, and who knew Kenneth from other film shoots, said, okay, this is a good script, I want to do it, and I'm basically going to do it for free, and I'll ask some of my friends to also basically work for free. And everyone brought their cousins and friends to work as technicians on the set. And so it became this collective effort where the support of one of the major stars of the industry made the film possible, or made a film possible that would not otherwise have been made. The reason why we thought it was useful and interesting to show the film in a series called The Black Atlantic is there are many reasons, and we're going to talk about them, but one of the most obvious ones is that Nollywood, when it first emerged, particularly the southern Nigerian film industry, was very strongly inspired by, as I was already mentioning, Brazilian soap opera. So it's basically a transatlantic cultural transfer, but there are influences from Indian films. And in this particular case, and Tunde is going to talk about this, there is a very specific American influence that we're also going to talk about. And it's a film that is interesting because it's, I would say, resonates very strongly with contemporary audiences anywhere you can show it. And one of the things that we want to talk about is maybe just why that is, why a film that comes out of Nigeria and is very distinctly Nigerian in ways that we're also going to discuss, can be so easily readable for audiences in many other places. And with that, I would ask Tunde to join us on the stage here, and Didi.
No.
Okay. So maybe, Tunde, you can tell us, first of all, you're the main female character in the film.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How did you get into this film?
Okay. So I knew Kenneth through a writing project. I had only been writing professionally a couple of years and was on my first TV gig. And Kenneth joined our writer's room in the second season. So we became friends. And so when, I think maybe 2 or 3 years later, I was involved with the Nigerian version of the Vagina Monologues, which they'd staged the American version, and some of the Nigerian audience had not quite connected with it. And so it was decided to make a Nigerian version with Nigerian stories from Nigerian women. And so I was one of the writers that was brought on board to write some of the monologues. And in that process of everyone around the table reading their drafts, the director asked if I would be interested in performing in the show. And because my motto in general, unless I can think of a good reason not to, is to say yes and panic later. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And I said that not really thinking about the fact that the monologues I'd written so far, one of them included, orgasm simulation on stage. So after the fact, I realized what I'd signed up for and had to go through that baptism of fire, which gave me a little more sympathy for actors. But yeah, so the first staging of the show was in Abuja, where at the time Kenneth was shooting for a BBC series. And so I invited whatever friends I had, I'm not sure why, in retrospect, to come see the show, and Kenneth was one of them. And after the show, he said that, oh yeah, you weren't bad, I should put you in my film when I make it. And I assumed that was just, like social small talk, the sort of thing people say and nobody really means it, blah, blah, blah bullshit. And surprisingly, I think about a year later, he reached out and said that, oh, so the script for that film is ready, I'm going to send it to you. And he sent it. And at the time, it was a very unusual script for a Nigerian film. As Vinzenz has said, there were most Nollywood films were following very familiar patterns, and there wasn't much that was breaking that mold, whether story-wise or technically. I personally was feeling very comfortable working in the cable TV space of soaps where your paycheck was guaranteed and people were putting in time to story development. And so it was pleasantly surprising to read this script. It wasn't perfect, but there was a lot about it that I thought was really interesting and new for the Nigerian movie space. And so I said, yeah, I'll definitely do it. It wasn't like a huge part, but yeah, maybe that was a good thing considering the level of my experience. But yeah, I said that, and then I think maybe the actual shoot was another year later, and yeah.
Yeah. What appealed to you in the script? I mean, it's this multi-character story where many stories are interwoven, and basically the two characters that drive the story forward are sort of small-time crooks.
Yeah.
Who intersect with various people who some of them try to lead an honest life, not very successfully.
Very much like the Nigerian experience. Yeah. I think you touched on some of it already. A lot of Nigerian stories in that Nollywood film space were very much about the moral. Typical Nollywood story is girl goes to university, falls in with a bad crowd that likes to sleep with men and get money from them, and smokes and drinks a lot, and either like gets AIDS or gets pregnant and dies from a botched abortion or finds the Lord. That was like a very typical story arc for a Nigerian film. And this was, it was very much multi-stranded. You could tell it was influenced quite a bit by Tarantino. I'm not sure how much of that you'll get from the finished version, because the script version was structured very similar to Pulp Fiction in terms of 4 different stories. And at first, we're not sure how these stories connect, but then by the end, it all comes together. And so that was the original intention. And the characters a lot of them are like crooks, small-time crooks, people grappling with what for them are big moral questions, but played with a sort of dark humor that sort of pokes fun at the seriousness with which they're handling those moral quandaries. And like my character, for example, is definitely a woman who gets away with being a bad woman, which was definitely not the thing you found in typical Nollywood. I don't know if that was the part that intrigued me, but in general, as a whole, I liked the idea of being part of something that was trying to tell a different kind of story like that. And wasn't leaning into like, it's a glamorous world or, that sort of escapist story.
Didi, you were a film critic for a long time, feared by many, to the point where when you started focusing on curating and archival work, some people were actually relieved in Nigeria. But this is a film you didn't write about because it was made by a friend. I still wonder what you would have written about it had it not been made by a friend. Now is the time to say.
I would say it. I think, well, the thing is also, of course, first of all, I mean, to go back a little bit to Tarantino and all that, because I think back in time we used to sit down in this office in downtown Lagos, and we'll talk about Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, and we'll talk about the economics of low-budget cinema and what it would be like to do something different from mainstream Nollywood and all that. So, and back then it was just talk, So, and most of those students back then, we are still in film school, and the mainstream Nollywood was like, when you say that there is an alternative independent cinema, what do you mean by saying that? Describe yourself as you are an off-Nollywood film critic or off-Nollywood filmmaker. That there's nothing like that. There is only Nollywood. There is no off. So because back then there has not been new people making films from Nigeria. But I was saying that, look, every major film culture in the world has got the mainstream, and you have also got maybe an alternative. That in Nigeria there is this movement coming up somewhere with young people wanting to do something a little bit different from Nollywood. So I think when I know Kenneth was doing this, I mean, if I sit down with the director, we'll talk all kinds of things to each other. I still think that, of course, in terms of what has been going on in Nigeria, the film reflects back when it was shot, a new voice, a fresh voice in the industry. You know that somebody was trying to say something different from what has been going on in Nigeria. And I think, and to continue a little bit on what I will have said about the stuff, I think maybe to look back a little bit on how we got to where we were, because I think oftentimes the cliche of Nollywood is that somebody brings videotapes and all, and he cannot, and then they decided it happens by chance, accident. So I think on that, it happened at a historical juncture when the first cinema of Nigeria, the post-war, after the Biafra Nigerian War of 1967-70 the cinema was going out of place. I think that when I was coming here, after we made the decision to screen Confusion Now, I was asking myself how to situate this film within the context of the Black Atlantic. It was somewhat problematic, so I somewhat solved it also by looking back to one of the driving forces of Nollywood, in the sense that one of the major things that kickstarted Nollywood was the arrival from America into Nigeria of evangelical Christianity. It is good that America have decided to put Donald Trump in so for whatever God knows whatever reason. So, but when in the late 80s, 90s in Nigeria, we were grappling with certain maybe existential issues, I think one of the most significant things that happened in Nigeria, which still reflects now in Nigeria's popular culture, which people are consciously, unconsciously grappling with, is the arrival, the deep influence of political Pentecostalism, and it all came from America to us. So we didn't go looking for it. So whereas Nigerian cinema in the digital era did not consciously make this attempt to grapple with the Black Atlantic experience, back home we had got that with us. It had come to stay. It began also sometime with this black pastor from America who was very popular in Nigeria back then. So we are having this connection with the Black Atlantic, not politically, but from the point of view of its religious, spiritual, from the spiritual point of view. So.
Yeah, and it's sort of colonized the morals of the culture as well, where you find that a lot of Nigerians go around saying things like, certain things are not in our culture, without the awareness that they've only been brought into that. Basically, the evangelical and Pentecostal movement has brought that in only in the last 40 years or so. And there are people who argue that those things have always been part of the Nigerian culture, and that anything that deviates from it is not Nigerian. And then that moved into like our entertainment.
And then you see that for instance, before Nollywood started, I think I've said this before Nollywood started at some point in Nigerian cinema, the Babalawo or the Sangoma, the witch doctor, was a protagonist in Nigerian cinema. He was not a villain. He was the person, if you watch the films of the earlier Nigerian cinema, he was the person who used to protect the community, the village. Never mind the fact that those early filmmakers used to make women witches without considering the historical factors why patriarchal society turned women into witches. Those early films accepted it as a given that in every African society that the evil forces are witches, and that these witches were always women. And the protagonist who used to battle the witches was the Sangoma, who was always a man. Then
I remember there was one woman I remember who was a protagonist.
Sangoma,
Orishabumi. She was on TV in the 80s. There was a show where there would be like the Fade Yoloro and the Orishabumi. She, I think, was a protagonist.
Yes, that was around about the time when Nollywood, when the cinema was, the 80s was actually going out. So Nollywood was already coming in at that point in time. So then you have this situation in which, when evangelical Christianity came to Nigeria, it subverted this narrative, and then the Sangoma became the villain. And the Christian pastor, which was from American Pentecostalism, has now become the new protagonist, the new savior, and the traditional religion, the traditional cultural belief have been subverted with this new belief. And the first product of Nollywood reflected this, in the sense that always you have film after film, the Christian pastor was the hero, and film after film, the African Sangoma, witch doctor, was the villain. So within this context, this atmosphere, and then a young filmmaker comes out and he makes something different without the usual suspects, without the usual villain, the usual that Nollywood have accepted and turned into a sort of new colonial trope. And I think it was a significant step forward. So, I mean, having known Kenneth before that time, of course, I was I expected this in a way anyway, so that, yeah, well, he went to film school, he knows, so he should do something a little bit different. So, of course, if I had written about that film, I would have also said this too. So, it's a little bit too retrospective to also look back to what I would have said about Kenneth. Save this, perhaps, that I'm willing to say, that I would have said that this filmmaker is so too self-conscious, a stylist. He likes to show to the audience, see how clever I am, see what I can do, see what I can put on the screen. So he's always looking at himself. I would have said that he is his own greatest fanboy.
But he did manage to build a career. I mean, he's producing film after film. Some of that work, of the later work, is actually on Netflix, so you can watch it. Oloture was picked up by Netflix. It was produced by Moa Budu, but picked up by Netflix, which is a sort of an expose about human trafficking, and the protagonist is a female journalist who goes undercover and then gets sucked into the human trafficking business. That's the film that was most visible, actually, the most successful one. But he's been working constantly. The Pentecostalism thing is interesting again, because the main area of where Pentecostalism was taking place outside of the U.S. in the global South was Brazil, of course. So there's a massive turn towards evangelicalism and Pentecostalism. And part of the reason why we have an Argentinian pope now is that the Catholic hierarchy felt they needed to stem the tide and actually put their foot back on the ground and reclaim, Christianity in South America for the Catholic Church. So there's a whole global history that remains to be told around these issues. I was also thinking of something that Wole Soyinka once talked about. The Yoruba spiritual system, the gods and goddesses of Yoruba spirituality are actually much more similar to the Greek gods and Greek mythology than Christianity. And it resonates much more strongly with that. And so part of the problems that the original Christian missionaries had when they came to what is now Western, Southwestern Nigeria, is they had to explain people who the devil was. Because there was no evil incarnate in that spiritual system. Yes.
Yeah, like basically the word for the devil in Yoruba now is the name of a god that's actually more like Loki. So more like a trickster god than like... There is no afterlife in Yoruba culture of like burning in hell or anything like that, or no sense that one God is the creator of all evil.
Right.
But yeah, they had to figure out a way to. And I feel like you still see that dichotomy and split personality in how Nigerians grapple with Christianity today. I think there is a sense that, I think at their core, there's a lot of disbelief for it. And so it results in a lot of contradictory behavior culturally, between like saying you're very Christian and then doing things that don't necessarily gel with that, because it doesn't really gel with their ancestral understanding of humanity.
And in that sense, it's also not really hypocrisy. Yeah. It's an attempt to negotiate a cultural space that has like layered belief systems, and you want to do justice to both of them, or I mean, the Confusion of Art has a lot of that too. I mean, there are characters like the father who runs a printing business and wants to be the epitome of integrity, and turns out to be a rather shady character actually. But then again, he's sincere in his intentions, nonetheless. So there's a lot of that kind of...
Yeah, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. we are all sincere in our intentions, actually. So I agree with reality. I agree with you. Yes, I agree with you. So yeah, but also one of the things also in this video is that it's instructive how the digital video craze also happened a little bit in the third world than in the so-called first world. I think also it's actually in keeping also with the tenets of third cinema there, so that the cheapening of the film production facilities actually paved the way for third filmmakers to give them the capability of making films. Because I remember that for quite a long time, FESPACO, which is a film festival in Africa, was not showing Nigerian films. So, because FESPACO insisted that they are not going to show anything that is not celluloid. The list they are going to go is for 16mm. Anything that is not celluloid, they will not show. So for quite some time, Nigerian films we are not going to FESPACO. So people always say to me that as a black person, why do I love Hegel so much? That Hegel has already removed black people from history. Say Hegel was the greatest philosopher of the last century. So, and I think that one of the things that critics of Hegel who are black failed to take away from Hegel was dialectics, the tendency of things to become its opposite. The Bible says it in such a way that the first shall be the last. So, now I think that the digital phenomenon actually, and this is a contentious statement, when you calculate what is also happening in America and Europe, with the right wing springing up and down, is that European civilization is actually at a crossroads. And I think that Africa is rising, and African cinema too at some point is going to have to take the center stage, and we are going to force the center, which is Western Europe or Europe, to come to us and the matches. So.
Like Semben Usman said, I am the sun, and Europe is the periphery. So, Tunde, how do you feel about that statement?
I don't believe in leaking my strategy. I move in silence.
But I mean, you've been working in Europe for some time now. Sometimes, dare I say, as the Nigerian informer on European projects. Like we discussed one where you were brought on board because one of the main characters was a wealthy Nigerian, and they understood that they had to have someone on the writing team who understood the language, the culture, the politics of the country in order to make that really resonate with reality. So how do you feel about that writing position at this point?
It can be challenging. I think it's a bit tricky because if you're in a room where you have to speak for an entire nation, it starts to get challenging, because normally if I was working on a project located in Nigeria, I would still need like a writer's room with a multiplicity of voices, because everybody's different and people have different opinions and different experiences. But then when you're suddenly in a room where everyone else is German and there's maybe one lead Nigerian character, but you also have to bring in their family and their background and then take them to Nigeria. And then there are ideas for what should happen when they're in Nigeria. And everyone is suddenly looking to you for that. And then you have to start balancing it against what's good for the story, what would I normally do if it was a story I was telling. And then so it can get tricky, because with this story in particular, it was a story that was exploring a lot of issues of capitalism and neocolonialism and wealth and class. And so then you're looking for ways to explore that without going for the cliches of, like, you know, the starving Africans fighting over food sort of thing. And then you have to like find ways to have that conversation in the room without saying like, well, actually that sounds a little racist, that you think that it would happen that way. You know, to try and have ways of navigating and figuring out the story in a constructive manner. So yeah, it involves some negotiation, but I think we came out with some good ideas. And I mean, I don't know if I should say this, in a sort of form of reverse colonialism, sort of like what Didi said. I ended up taking the lead on the writing for that project. So I guess that is a form of what you said.
He's right.
Yeah, but on other projects I've worked on, you do still find some of that. I mean, people can be very well-meaning, but then again, you find yourself in that situation where you don't want to speak for the entire world. And you also sometimes don't want to be the person, maybe the producer has good intentions of wanting to speak to certain things that have happened historically, but then you don't want the character to be reduced to a lecture. You want the character to feel like a human person, and you have to find a way to convince that person that I understand your intentions and I understand you want to be an ally, but maybe people will connect more with this character if he's just human. So, you know, there's things like that you have to negotiate.
Yeah. I mean, one of the most interesting philosophers working today for me is Olufemi Taiwo, who, as you can tell from the name, has a Nigerian background, teaches at Georgetown University. There are actually two philosophers called Olufemi Taiwo, but I'm talking about the younger one. And
who did Elite Capture?
Yes, exactly. So his most recent book is called Elite Capture, and it's very much about the liberal logic of giving a voice to minorities in the room, and basically it's sort of a gesture of ceding a certain amount of power and then letting someone represent who's in a minority position to be basically the ambassador of everyone who's different. And his critique is that, you know, that's just not helpful because it reaffirms the structure of the room. And it reaffirms the power differential. Basically what you want to do is tear down the house and rebuild it all new. So yeah, becoming the head of the writing team, I think, is a good move in that particular sense.
I mean, I didn't think I made a move, but still, well, I mean, maybe I did. Maybe I subconsciously did.
The Confusion novel is an interesting film also because it has some European money in it. Which is not usually the case for Nigerian films. I mean, people go to the bank to get money, like the old Hollywood producers did.
Or to relatives.
Or to relatives. But it's basically venture capital of some sort. Nobody wants anything to do with the government because, you know, government grants can land you in jail if you don't pay them back. And so... Sorry, you would take government money?
No, I'd never been in that area. Yeah. Like I said, I stuck to working for like the cable networks, so right. I didn't know about like ending up in jail if you took the government money.
If you take a loan, you cannot pay it by the government. We catch you.
I remember a conversation with the Nigerian producer who said, "I would never take government money because, you know, there's an whole lot of trust, and we don't know what the strictures would be." And so, and for the kinds of projects that we're interested in, there's always enough venture capital, either from banks or from relatives, or, you know, money that we put up front. So it's a very different system. And so what's relatively remarkable is that the development money for this came from the ecology of festivals acting as producers. I mean, that's also an important development of the last 30 years, we can now say, that big festivals fighting for world premieres put themselves in a position where they become producers to secure world premiere rights to films of budding new directors who often turn out to be major talents. And Rotterdam was actually at the avant-garde of that, and the Hubert Bals Fund was specifically designed to allow filmmakers from what we now imprecisely call the Global South to develop their project, to produce them, to finish them. I don't know if you're familiar with the Chinese filmmaker Wang Bing, who made an incredible 9-hour documentary about deindustrialization in northeast China called West of the Tracks. It's one of the greatest documentaries of the 21st century, shot with a small DV camera without any permits. And then Hubert Bals stepped in and paid for the post-production and premiered the film. And now it's this canonical documentary. And so this is the I'm calling it the festival production, festival/producer ecology that Kenneth successfully tapped into. But then the funds were not sufficient, and he was lucky enough to have a constellation, among others, with Ollie Nuhut, that made it possible for him to make this very unusual film, or unusual at the time. How would you say has the film influenced Nollywood since it came out?
I'm sure Didi can speak to this in more detail, but I definitely think there's been a lot more. When Kenneth came out and the film didn't get like a wide release screening in Nigeria, he was often referred to as a festival director, someone who made films that people didn't actually want to watch, that was meant for some premiere in some country most of Nigeria would never go to, and that sort of thing. And now I think there's been a lot of directors since then. I think, was it last year or the year before, Berlinale had maybe 2 or 3 Nigerian films. In 2020, they had 2. So it's become more normalized, and it's become a thing where a lot of filmmakers see it as the normal path. Like now I have like writers who started as assistants under me around the time I was moving to Berlin, who this is the path they all see as a normal path. I make 2 or 3 short films. I try to get into festivals all over the world, and that's the start of my filmmaking career. So it's become a pattern he set has become seen as the norm.
I think this year festival is problematic. It is good, and I think it's also bad. So I think in 2023, the Berlinale launched what they called back then the Berlin Talent Campus, and in 2024, I was the first Nigerian who entered the Berlinale Talent.
24?
2004, oh. 2004.
20 years ago.
Yeah, so I was the first Nigerian at the Berlinale, and then in 2005, the fund that first entered Nigeria was the Göteborg Film Festival Fund. In 2005, Göteborg funded a project of my own called The Madness of Didi. So, and then in 26, I wrote a script for the Hubert Bals when Hubert Bals was coming to Nigeria. Hubert Bals first funded the script Lilies of the Ghetto, which I wrote, and then I co-directed with Joe Brown, also so one guy in Nigeria. Then in 2006 or 2005, Kenneth was at the Berlinale, and then he got also with the Hubert Bals Fund. I think whatever you want to say about Nollywood, and I'm a filmmaker who stands outside the mainstream cinema called Nollywood, is that you cannot take away from Nollywood. When I left journalism, that I wanted to go and be a filmmaker, my family was a little bit, are you crazy? You want to live you say you want to go and become, what do you mean by film? You want to go and make film. You have gone to school. You are trying to make you now to start bringing money to the family. You say you want to go and do film again. And an uncle of mine said, leave him, let him go and study, that there's money in film, that there's Nollywood. If Nollywood had not existed, people would have thought I was crazy, that I want to go and throw my life away. So I think you cannot take that away from Nollywood, that Nollywood changed African cinema for good or for bad. So prior to this time, practically hardly any person in Africa was getting to see African film. We always say Sembene is the father of African cinema, but Sembene's film how many people get to see his film in Senegal? Sometimes they are banned. And
you had to live on a university campus to see
exactly. So, because I've said sometime, and it's a contextual statement. I think Kenneth was even angry with me when I said it. I said it's high time African cinema came out of African studies from Europe and America. We want to see it in cinema, not just in classrooms. So I think that what this European funding did for us was that it made it possible for some of us to make film, even if we sometimes put this film in our cupboard. The advantage of Confusion Nawa was that it was one of the first films that was seen more than the previous film that was funded by European money. So that was the advantage of Confusion Nawa. So there was a movement that created that situation. There's still an ongoing movement, which I think is being eclipsed because big money is now beginning to tap into this independent cinema. So, I mean, Kenneth Young has been doing films for Moa Budu. So, and I think when I see him down, we tell him that is killing your talent. They are throwing big money at you. You no longer know what to do with it. So I think that it is good that European money through the film funds are coming into Africa. Festivals are good, but also we want these films to be seen in Nigeria. I don't kid myself that there's going to be a very big audience for avant-garde films in Nigeria. It's not going to be possible at the moment, I think. So we have got to know that you are looking for a special crowd, a special audience, and you learn how to not overshoot yourself. But it's good for us to balance this cinema, money we get from international cinema. And the good thing about the Hubert Bals and Göteborg Film Fund, they don't do like the French. The French want to write your script for you and tell you how to make the film. So that is the problem with French funds. So in Africa. So yes, I throw it back to you.
Yeah. In any case, the film is now 11 years old, and it has had a long life and a continuing life. And I think you will find that that life is not over. Let's have the screening now and then continue the discussion with the audience after the screening. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So we have some time for questions. Maybe to get things started, an observation regarding language in the film. This is a multi-language film, strictly speaking. The title contains a pidgin element, Nawa. The main characters speak a lot of pidgin. We have characters marked as Igbo. We have the father, who's sort of a Yoruba. The publisher marked as a Yoruba. There's Hausa elements, so it's an all Nigeria linguistic mix in a way. Maybe you can say something about that, because I mean, one of the remarkable things about the Nigerian film industries, plural, has been that they realized the postulate of decolonial thinking, namely they created a cultural industry in regional languages rather than in the language of the colonizer. But this, in a way, represents the next step, sort of a linguistic syncretism of the post-colonial nation-state.
I think probably up till the 80s, it was a lot of the local industries were very regionalized. I know I watched a lot of Yoruba language television as a kid because that's what my parents and my uncles watched. And I think some of the early Nollywood was also in Igbo, living in bondage. Yes. And yeah, I guess the Hausa in the north, they also had like very regional language. So it was quite segmented. And I think part of what the beginning of what became Nollywood was the first people who aspire to cross beyond their region, to make films that would be watched beyond their region, and starting to see the possibilities for a wider market that way.
Well, yes, because I think back in 72, 3 or 4, Labalogo made the first indigenous language film, Amadi, which is supposedly lost, because right now nobody, even him, does not know where he is. Then he made the second one in Yoruba, Ajani Ogun. So like Tunde said, there was the tendency to film, because the earlier films, based on the fact that Ola Balogun was directing films for theater practitioners after he has filmed his film, so he began, these theater practitioners began calling him to come and turn their stage plays into film. The theater practitioners were based on the western part of Nigeria. We used to call it, it's a traveling theater. We used to call it the Yoruba traveling theater. And so they had their established audience beforehand. And most of the audience were not educated people. So Ola Balogun was shooting film in the language which the traditional audience used to understand for the film, in the film. So back then, the also Hausa film was, when they say cinema died in Nigeria, it didn't die in northern Nigeria. Northern Nigeria was still showing, people were still going to cinema. There was still cinema culture in northern Nigeria. Cinema culture died only in the south. But Southerners are in the habit of saying cinema died in Nigeria. I see the south represents the whole of Nigeria. Hausa land did not exist. So there was still ongoing cinema culture. And I always make this controversial statement that Hausa people understands film and acts film better than any other part of Nigeria. So it's a controversial statement. There's causing quarrel in Nigeria when I say it. So yes, there's this segmentation. And then when Nollywood came with its earlier Igbo stuff, then also what enabled Nollywood to cross over was began to speak English in a way that was cutting across. So mostly again the southern part of Nigeria. So this scene has been there off and on to speaking. It's only relatively recent. I think the first pidgin English movie was Ola Balogun's Music Man, which won the music award in Carthage Film Festival. So I think it was the music award he won in Carthage Film Festival. So, but which also didn't sell. So then there's a trend among new emerging Nigerian filmmakers to make movies in pidgin English, because at some point pidgin English was being reclaimed. We used to look down on it and call it vernacular, but now people are beginning to claim it as Nigerian language. It even caused a problem at the Academy Awards some 2-3 years back, when Nigeria submitted a film that was rejected in the foreign language category. And people were saying that, no, it's our language. Pidgin English is not British English. Pidgin English is Nigerian English. So yeah.
I also think, on the one hand, it's interesting. Sorry, I might have forgotten what I'm about to say. Sorry. But I wanted to say two things. One was that part of the issue or the challenge was you could see that as they were doing more films in English, in early Nollywood, you could see that a lot of actors weren't performing naturally because they were speaking a language that they wouldn't necessarily speak casually in their everyday life. And so you were getting a lot of stilted performances from that. And I think there was an idea that embracing pidgin more would loosen that up. And I do know that I came from a generation where before my generation, there was very much that criminalization of like everybody must speak perfect English and only like criminals and like people who live on the street speak pidgin. And I remember my brother being someone who very much, it became a cool thing for teenage boys to be able to speak pidgin. So I think those are the boys who then grew into the adults who are making these films now where they speak.
Yeah, I also remember a conversation with Aldi Nuhu, and you were there as well, in Berlin recently, where he said basically this is now the model for all Nigerian films, or all Nigerian films tend towards this language mix with sort of pidgin as the meeting ground, and it's a precondition for distribution. Like if you want to make a film for the national market and want it to be shown in Ugu and in Kano and in Lagos, this is what the soundtrack is going to be like.
Yes, which is also a very terrible thing. Because the film which Netflix did not permit us to show, Amina, did not work in English. So there is this tendency of trying to look for wider distribution. Because I think that there is really nothing bad with specialty markets. There's really nothing wrong in saying that, okay, I want to make a movie, an art house movie, an art movie for this and that audience. This tendency of wanting to please the whole crowd. And then some films, like the historical view, Amina, really, for me, did not work as an English film. So imagine Sarawunya. Imagine if Sarawunya will have been. So there are some films I think that works within its own environment, not trying to please the whole crowd. So I think it's not specifically a Nigerian thing. Hollywood also makes lots of crappy things trying to reach white markets too. So
yeah. Absolutely. One last little remark, since we've mentioned him several times. Ali Nuhu here is the actor who plays the office clerk, and it's sort of a comedic role because he's constantly condemned to inaction, and he's the one who doesn't get anything done and is being taken advantage of by everyone, including in particular his wife. And that's actually also a really interesting change of tack for this actor, who is typically in all his other films like the star and the action, at least the person who can move the action forward. I can move around with the microphone. Do we have questions from the audience? Yeah, you want to say something? Okay, all right.
Hello, thank you. I really enjoyed the movie. It's really, I think, from the sound to dialogues, everything was actually confused. Like it was like the title of Confusion Nawa, because different scenes where, for example, I was like, if this movie was screened in Nigeria, I mean, the Nigerian crowd would criticize a lot. Yeah, of a lot of things in culture. Like, for example, I like the transitions between the songs, right? So the first party scene, you hear drums beating. In contemporary Nigeria, you don't hear drums, but I think it adds a lot of beauty to the whole movie, because you hear drums, then you hear Inyanya playing, then you hear High Life. I'm like, crazy. That's different scenes of party. Like, I don't know if you get what I'm saying. So the different scenes of, the whole party, if it was just Inyanya, it's contemporary, it's just Nigerian, right? But it's like a move. It's like, it tells a story completely about, what Didi said about the whole transitioning from the normal norm to, different. And then it's like you're coming back to Igbo high life. Like, who parties with Igbo high life? Like, yeah. And it's a whole lot. Even it's a story in a story. Like, you can generate like probably like 10 different, I don't know, scenarios and stories from the movie. So there are different things happening at the same time. Everything is happening in confusion. And one particular scene that made me to think very well was, when Alinihu was in cell. And I don't know if anybody noticed the bird. There was somebody's name that was on it. It was Good Luck J. And I was like, is that not the president's name at that point? So the statement was really bold, and it was a really beautiful film. And even the resolution compared to, films as of then, the quality of the movie for it to be watched, it's really like it's stepping out. Originally, as you said, like movies were made for profit making. Little efforts were made to really do a good work. This is really beautiful. Yeah.
I think Kenneth would be very excited to hear everything you said.
No, he has heard it already.
This is recorded, so he can replay it and listen to it. Yeah, I'm partial to the camera work as well. I think the cinematography is quite remarkable. Yinka Edwards is the cinematographer, and he's someone who's doing a lot of work in Nigerian films right now. He's also partially based out of Britain, but a graduate of the National Film Institute. Yes. I think you were about the same age, right?
He was I think young. He was yes, but at least I left. I was out of NFI when I met Kenneth. Kenneth was also, me and Kenneth, we were meeting. I was a little higher than, but Yinka Edward was, I think, Yinka Edward took me by surprise. I was wondering, where did he come from? So, but the assistant director of photography, Ifeanyi Iloduba, is a really good photographer. He's a really good photographer. I think I'm biased because he's my photographer. Yeah. I think he's the best from that generation of film. The assistant photographer whose name was Ifeanyi Iloduba after Yinka's name. Mm-hmm. So he's a good photographer. So Yinka as well. But I wanted to ask, did you ever watch Alinuhu in his local dialect? Have you seen any of his films when he's not in? Have you seen?
Apart from the things that are on Netflix now.
Okay. Yeah. With Netflix, it's becoming polished. It's becoming polished. So the original Hausa film that acts like India when they will meet and start dancing in the street. So
yeah, I mean, I know the clips of him, the Shah Rukh Khan type of thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think another thing I wanted to add was, the role you played about, there was some statement that was said, it might be subtle, but it's, issues like you were talking about, I told you, you didn't want to change even when I told you the condoms were itchy. It's typical of, Africans, or let me just say Nigerians, I can't talk for all Africans here, of the African woman, you're supposed to take it, anything that goes wrong is your fault. So everybody's looking, why is she cheating? You're not thinking she's not happy in the marriage. You're not thinking of all she's going. I mean, she's complaining about your health.
He's a very frustrating man, isn't he?
Yeah. So nobody's looking, towards that direction. And, another thing I think I liked about the movie was, his boss. I mean, naturally, in the African or Nigerian, the woman doesn't even rise to that. For her talking back at him, she's, he's now, it's like a caricature of the society, as of, 10 years ago. It's like breaking out. It's crazy.
Yeah, because like I said that time, this director is his own biggest fanboy. So he likes looking at himself. He likes admiring himself. I say, see how crazy. I see the line I can come up with. See what I can write on the screen. See what I can. So I think for me the film works when it's playing. When the film begins to take itself serious. So the film works with those two guys who are always joking and playing with all those words. So it works. It works for me. So like I said, that it's not the thing when you show this thing to audiences in Nigeria, it's because it's a fresh eye. People see that, that if Nollywood, if we give some directors money, if we give the opportunity, they can tell something beyond Aki and Papa and all those things they used to do. So this is the thing with the film too. So that there is a new generation also of filmmakers who are coming up in Nigeria trying to do something new, not necessarily on the usual commercial Nollywood basis, so which is good, and that also filmmakers who also don't want to go to Cannes. What do you want to Cannes? Are you a French person? Why are you struggling that you want to go to Cannes? There is also an audience at home. So there are filmmakers who are struggling to tell stories for the audience back home. Trying to catch these new experiences about black people also in Nigeria, black people also. So it happened between Nigeria and Ghana. Films will begin to cross borders in Africa, trying to tell this story. Because I think until Nollywood, this has not been happening. So African films don't used to cross from country to country. So Nollywood, as African films, oftentimes you always have to come to, you see at Cannes Film Festival, or then it disappears. So with Nollywood, countries are beginning to collaborate. African filmmakers go to Ghana to shoot movies. Ghana filmmakers we exchange actors. African films can be seen in Kenya. So through African Magic 2, we begin to see films from Kenya, from the southern part of Africa. So these films are beginning to intersect. But of course, the films are still a little bit too commercially driven. So I watch them. I have to give them support as a critic, but I still think that the films are still a little bit.
It actually, just to add a little detail and observation, and that's actually significant. We do a little exercise in a course called Understanding Hollywood, where the students have to study the film program of a city of their choice from around the globe on a given date, and they're using the internet to figure out which films are playing in any given city. And so last summer, somebody chose Ouagadougou, which is the site of the FESPACO festival, which is sort of the hub of the Francophone African film culture, and you were talking about it, the third cinema hub and the festival where for a long time they didn't screen any Nigerian films, only celluloid films, certainly no Nollywood video films. And what was interesting is that in the commercial cinemas in Ouagadougou, they were actually screening French-dubbed versions of Nigerian films on that particular time. And that, I think, is an indicator of what you were just saying. So these films are really breaking through, and actually are breaking through cultural barriers that used to keep Africa from becoming a coherent cultural space, namely the persistence of the colonial structure. So that I thought was a really fascinating thing.
And also part of, because for quite a long time, when you come to Nigeria, people are familiar, when they talk of cinema, it's Hollywood.
Yeah.
When I began running this art house space, I remember the first time we did a retrospective of Werner Herzog. And then we showed Aguirre over the weekend. And the last film of the day was Aguirre itself. And it was getting late. And the director was not around. And I was sitting up front. And the program manager kept coming to tell me that, look, we have to stop this screening halfway, that people are tired at night, as some people need to go home. And I was sitting there and I was, what? I was thinking to myself, he wants me to stop Kinski halfway? So interrupt his performance. So I pretended I didn't hear what he was saying. And after the screening, the crowd was still there. Then they said, but they have not seen, they are only used to Hollywood movies. And Hollywood make bad movies, so. But it's true, Hollywood make bad movies, so for the most part, but they try to ape. So at first, Nigeria was trying to ape Hollywood, trying to make a Nigerian version of Hollywood without the money, without the technique of Hollywood. They are trying to make Hollywood in Nigeria. So, and they have not been seeing European films. So it was a surprise when they were beginning to see that, look, film could not be Hollywood, and it could be good. So and filmmakers are beginning to, younger filmmakers, because they also have this benefit of coming from film school and all, they have this idea of film culture across the world, and they could see that you could create narrative beyond what you see in commercial Hollywood Hollywood cinema. So I think, with that regard, also narrative is beginning to be a little bit strange, different in Nigeria. So I think recently, strange new things are beginning to come out. It's good they're experimenting. Some of the experiments are not like that. Confusion can also, it's not a virtue, but it could mean that creative things are happening on the ground that is finding a perfect way of expressing itself. But in the interim, it's still confused. So,
yeah. Just to add one little note, this is something that Bukari Savadogo talked about last week outside of the public part of the discussion. In Burkina Faso, there are now like regional micro industries, people making small video films and then distributing them through villages, through public screenings in video form, and they're basically replicating the original Nollywood business model, but at a regional or local level in regional languages. So you see, it goes in various directions. You see Nollywood maturing in certain ways, also in terms of the industry structure, and at the same time, there's a lot of imitation happening across the region, and it's really become a model for storytelling in entirely new ways. Do we have other questions or remarks from the audience? Yeah.
Okay, hi everyone, good evening. So I would also love to comment on the fact that,
Tunde?
Yeah, Tunde. On the fact that before we started the screening, you were talking about, I think, culture and modernity, like, Christianity, religion, and all of that. And I could actually see it in the movie when, I don't know, was it a struggle or the father trying to portray the whole Christian, the father of that young guy that they were calling him gay, was trying to portray the Christian part of the whole faith and all of that, the religious aspects of it. And based on the music that he was playing, and when he was on his scenes, the music that we're playing, and then it was sort of different for him to now pick his child and take him to where there was the bar and all of that. So there was the tradition versus culture versus modernity and all of that, trying to fix your child in the proper way, but then you don't look at you're going out of your morals to make sure that your child fixes his ways and goes back to the way he is. And then I think there was also a part I wanted to talk about. When the lady's father that was raped, there was a shoot. I thought I was going to see the normal Nigerian kind of movie because of the time it was being produced. Maybe most especially because the man is a Yoruba man. So I was expecting to see that, okay, maybe this man is going to do juju because of the guys. And then it was and I saw him going to get a gun. It was far, far different from what we were used to. And it was basically more like a shift from that aspect. Imagine watching this movie back then, maybe when it was produced, it was going to show more light to what Nigerian films are actually and what we are growing into. Thank you.
Yeah, I think watching it now, I feel like there are things I would love to tweak and that I would probably take up with Kenneth and Tom, maybe some changes to some elements about those storylines. But as you said, at the time, it was already a very different way of handling certain things. Back then, if a girl was raped, it was definitely her fault. And first of all, her entire family would blame her for leaving the house. And then, as you said, things like juju would very quickly come into the storyline. And also, the story of the boy who may or may not be gay. I really like the fact that the way it was handled there, it was a case of, the issue isn't whether he actually is or not. The issue is how his father reacts to the possibility that he might be, and highlighting how absurd his reaction is. And so I really like that that was a way of handling it, especially because at that time, there was already that big bubbling of the whole, like, oh my God, the gay menace, we need to be scared of them going on, we need to pass laws and things like that going on in Nigeria. So I like that there was that. Given how much more fraught some of these issues have become, I feel like in the world we are now, I would probably have wanted to do a bit more with those. But it is also a fine balance given the tone and the genre of how to handle that.
Okay, I actually want to make a comment and then ask the question. Okay, I love the fact that in the movie they try to use humor to actually address societal issues, and then we are all laughing and joking about it, but it's actually a very critical issue even right now in Nigeria. And the fact that it's used in non-linear structure, because when we started, we were like, someone was shot, what happened? And by the end of the movie, we already understood, okay, this was what happened and all that. But then what I want to ask is, I understand that you mentioned that the normal Nigerian movies is always didactic in nature because there's always a moral lesson to grab at the end of it. I don't think it's the same with this one. And with the whole structure of the movie and everything, from you know, all these crimes and everything, it still happens from where I'm coming from. In Onitsha, for example, even now, we carry bags the way Mr. Didi is carrying his own. Why? Because if you hang your bag maybe on your shoulder, you will not know what will happen. And the next thing, you're looking for your phone or you're looking for your money.
We do that here in Germany.
Oh, wow. And so even I think one that I experienced was somebody was carrying this way. And then somebody was in front as they were just dragging, trying to cross the gutter and all that. The person has to use his hand, take it to the back and collect somebody's phone, and the person would not even know. So these are critical issues that are actually happening right now. But then the fact that, you know, you used humor in the movie, you know, to address it was quite horrible. But then I want to ask, does it mean that from what the movie suggests, does it mean that crimes or corruption, moral decay are inevitable in Nigeria? And is the movie trying to give excuses, for some of the persons that are actually suffering? Perhaps might be the poor persons. They are not collecting bribes. They are not working in the government offices where they have to get a lot of money, or where they have to loot a lot of money. So is this movie trying to, you know, serve as an excuse, you know, for them to continue committing the crime because of societal pressures? Or, I don't know, like what the Bible says. It said there, in Ecclesiastes, where he said, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches of men to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. So I want to understand if the movie is just trying to suggest that, okay, time and chance happening to them all, or is an excuse for crimes.
I mean, I think Kenneth and Tom could probably say best, but my reading and understanding, my interpretation of it, is that it isn't giving an excuse or saying that it's inevitable. I would say that it's pointing out that, so for example, I have a friend who used to say she really believed in karma. And I personally, this was when we were both in about like 18, 19. And I found this quite shocking because the world was full of examples that karma, of people who do horrible, horrible things and carry on with life. And I think if you comfort yourself with the idea that, oh, well, the poor people, the bad people will be punished, so I just have to have faith in that and just carry on with my life, then that's fantasy will only take you so far. That if you see the world as it really is, you can start to address those issues in practical ways. That's what I would take away from it. I would take away from it that I can't like see all these horrible things and think, well, those bad people will get what they deserve, which is kind of how Bello addresses it, rather than like that it would be better to come up with practical ways of dealing with those issues and seeing those people and those situations and the structures that have led to those situations for what they really are. I think saying to a girl, for example, oh, what you do is sinful, and if you do sinful things, bad things will happen, or that sort of like, the moral decline happening as a result of your sin or whatever, is not a productive way to address a situation of class inequality or educational poverty. That those things need to be addressed with practical solutions. And that's in subtle ways showing, for example, that what's OC's character, coming from a home and a household of violence, all that is part of what led to that. And therefore, we need to address the situations where a culture of him being raised that way leads to him being that person. That's what I would say.
So I think one of your questions or one of your comments was based on the fact that you said the moral behind the story, the moral of the story, what's your take home from the story. I would say there is definitely a take home based on the two friends, the two guys. There's definitely a take home from there. Like, how can you be with a friend that goes behind your back and sleeps with your girlfriend, and you don't even see that? You're still together with him till the present day that you got shot because of his crime. Like, you're now taking the fault and taking everything for him because, I don't know, is it that he was too... and the funny part is he's more intelligent. I think he's more intelligent than the criminal, the main criminal. He's more intelligent than him, but he couldn't see that. Or was he too friendly to move away or overlook certain things, and he landed into that? Or
yeah, I think... sorry, before you finish, I just wanted to buttress that it speaks to a bit of what people say about rape culture and how a lot of... almost every man knows someone who has done something sexually questionable, and that a lot of men are in situations where their friends do make jokes about those things, and they all laugh about it, and they keep saying, oh, he seems like a really nice guy. And then sometimes there are consequences and sometimes there aren't. But we have in this story an example of one person who didn't face head on the reality of what his friend is, because he's his friend and he's charming and he's fun and he gives him a phone, and there was a consequence for him, not for the friend. The friend was fine, but he faced the consequence. And in a way, it some sort of suggests that in a society where some of us let these things happen, we all suffer.
So I think in all, there are a lot of lessons to actually learn from this movie. If you sit and watch it and understand where it works or like where it goes through, you would definitely see a lot of stories and lessons from them.
Yeah. Well, can you wait for the microphone? I'm also getting signals that we should come to an end, but we have a question back there. Okay.
People projecting their own expectations.
Weren't they all confused, the characters, painted as somebody who takes another person for something else, which is maybe where you pointed to, that's not how you deal with the real problems. That's how you deal with something you invented. If you want to deal with the real problems, stop that confusion. And I think that's a takeaway of it, which is kind of nice. Actually, there's a little question. I laughed sometimes. Was it a lot more funny if I would have been a Nigerian person? Because, okay, thank you. Yeah, I thought so. There were a lot of jokes I did not get. Okay. No, cool, don't worry.
So here's your task for the evening: is to become more Nigerian. It's hard work, but it's possible. Yeah. El Nathan Joan. It's not a very optimistic book, though. But it's a very true book. Yeah, Helen.
I didn't want you to walk. Oh boy. Yeah. Hello. Unfortunately, I came in a little late, but I would like to say that I really appreciate when I came in. I heard a lot of Osadibe. It was so amazing. Girl, did you say you cannot party with Osadibe? Wait.
I said, like, how do they switch from local drums to nyanya, and then I love high life. Come on.
Okay.
Everybody does.
Good. Yeah. So I just really appreciate that, you know, because it reminds me of my childhood and just playing osadebe, drinking palm wine with my dad and just having a good time, eating suya, you know. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that and to also mention that the film was so funny. Like, I was laughing like a crazy person up there. I was laughing like a crazy person, and yeah, it's just, it brought me back to, you know, it also reminded me where Nollywood started and how it has evolved. I wasn't really like a Nollywood person, like viewer growing up, but it did grow into me, you know, at some point. Also, I even have a friend from India who would call me Aki. Aki and Popo, because I'm a little person, so he would call me like, Aki, see how short you are, you know. So it just reminded me of, you know, my childhood, and also seeing how Nollywood has evolved. And yeah, it was nice hearing a lot of Igbo as well. But I also wanted to comment on that. I mean, I'm guessing. Oh. I'm guessing nowadays the Igbo films that are made, I mean, because the Igbo they were speaking, it was almost like they were not trying to speak Igbo.
Senwa is not Igbo.
No.
Yes, they are not Igbo. So, so yeah.
I was like, okay, are these... okay. I mean, I did appreciate the Igbo, their efforts, exactly. But I was like, okay. But it was nice to hear. And then I questioned, oh, are they actually Igbo? But then I also noticed that the Yoruba father.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that family also is Yoruba in quotes, yeah.
Because from his accent, I pictured he was from Plateau State with the...
because they said they had to bring relatives and everybody to shoot the film, so it was forgivable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was just, you know, again, I was late. I didn't really follow the story from the beginning. But yeah, I just noticed all these little things, and I thought to say that it was amazing watching, and I had a good time. Thank you.
I think one thing that is obvious is that this filmmaker knows film. He has watched film, he knows Godard, he knows Breathless, he knows this thing that happens by chance, how somebody gets shot in place also, so he references these things, so you know, so the thing, that is one of the things you take from, you know that this is a filmmaker has watched film so long, so he knows how to play, so he's trying to play with this knowledge, he's trying to play with this thing, but do you have a chance for one more question? He has been indicating.
Yeah, can we, do we have time for one last question? Because I'm getting signals from the back that we should stop.
You are indicating?
Yeah, okay. Let me give you the microphone. But after that, I'm afraid we're going to have to come to an end.
Yeah, I think she just touched a bit on it. I wanted to, you guys to, you know, speak a bit to confusion hour, yeah, the confusion generally that was going on there, and then I'm going to take it a bit to some of the camera work, then the post-production, especially the music. I mean, I had a lot of music that that are a bit more, maybe, I don't know, 70s, thereabout, that are actually very, very far away from, I mean, the time, the set, should I say, the time of the film. So, and then if you were going to, you know, touch on that, maybe bring it, you know, a bit home to the theme generally of Black Atlantic, you know, culture, or yeah, Black Atlantic, and then the double aspects theories, especially because of the age or the time that the music, most of the music in the film was, I mean, kind of, do you get what I mean? And you know how that comes into this confusion. Or
I'll say a little bit, and then maybe you can. So in terms of the music and the time, I do know that, like, in the original script, it was very Fela infused and Fela inspired, and of course, music rights to Fela music is very expensive. So I think what they went for post-production wise was music that was evocative of the time of Fela without actually having to pay Fela rates, which is understandable. And I think some of that also lends to this sense of how it's shot in Kaduna, but the city is never named. It's this sort of non-space, non-city, where everyone is every tribe, and Chichi's clothes are a bit like 70s cut. And yeah, I think there was, this is my interpretation, it's not anything anyone has told me, but I do think there was a sense of a feel that of wanting to evoke that 70s, Festac 77, Black Pride mood and energy with the film.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's a whole line of argument about hip hop and rap, and I'm you know, Tupac is sort of a subtext. Only God can judge me now is referenced, and then there's the Tupac poster in his childhood room. But again, you know, you can't use Tupac on the soundtrack because, you know, the music rights cost more than the entire film. But it's a reference, and it's part of the narrative. And I think that the sort of the 70s, I'm not going to call it nostalgia, sort of a revival perspective, also resonates with the Tarantino reference, but I you know, it's not like, okay, look at what Tarantino does and we're going to do the same thing for Nigeria, but it has a very different vibe or energy for Nigeria because of the Festock moment, because of what Fela meant to the 70s and 80s in Nigeria. So yeah,
I think I mean, I like the music a lot, because they are music from my generation. It's not because I'm Methuselah, and it's also not because the music corresponds with the film. It does not. Nothing about this film corresponds with itself. The filmmaker always, I think the filmmaker deliberately did not set out to tell you a story that you should take seriously. Even the killing of the person, it's not something that should be taken. Even the blood, to me, does not look like proper from the beginning. So the filmmaker does not encourage you to take. Like I said, this is a filmmaker who is from film school. He has watched film. He knows film. He knows that he has known that narrative does not necessarily have to relate to each other. People can meet each other chance, and then you feed them, one person disappear. You won't see. He has watched his Godard. He knows, so he knows how to try to tweak this thing to make it into Nigeria, and to make it into a Nigerian atmosphere. And I think also this in a way relates to the question you ask: how do we relate this film to the Black Atlantic? So it's also the idea of there is a filmmaker who is Nigerian, who is black, and I don't think any of his reference in this film is African. This film has no reference Mbene. He has not referenced any African filmmaker. So he has crossed. He has gone. This filmmaker, their love for film is released. They used to make a joke about it, that why do I love Citizen Kane? Why do I love Us in Wales so much? So they are children of, they are disciples of, they love Tarantino, Rodriguez, and this other, the Mexico-Brazilian guy, this one who did this film, that's this true story that this boss was moving.
Iñárritu.
Yes, Iñárritu. So they love these guys. So I used to joke with them that they know the technique of cinema without taking. It's a joke between me and them. They know cinema without taking cinema serious. So they have this tendency of playing with it. So I think that also it's the dilemma of an African filmmaker working today, a Nigerian filmmaker working today, but his references are actually across the Atlantic. They are not using the parameters, the yardstick which you get from, say, African cinema. They are not referencing third cinema and all that. So they are looking at themselves and they are looking at their society, but not through experiences they derive from their own society. And this actually, when I was saying before, I struggled for myself to situate the narrative within the concept of the Black Atlantic. But we don't have to be rigid, I think, also with that. So this is actually the hope the whole essence of this program, the Black Atlantic Experience.
Exactly.
But we infused it not because it corresponds so rigidly to that. I don't think there's any rigid parameter which we are using to. But it still works and it still fits into this, because this is the beginning in the term of filmmakers who have made films like that. This is the one that is a little bit so outside more than all the other films that was made within the category of Nollywood. So it's expressive of filmmakers beginning to grapple with different topics. I remember the first time I screened, I think it was Vinzenz Dry. It was Dry, the film Dry. Was it Vinzenz that has this homoerotic scene? Has these two guys. So I think the title of the film is DREI or something. So it's a German film.
But that's not a Wenders film.
That's not Wenders film. So, but I scripted. So the time we screened it for Goethe Institute, I remember we screened it with these two guys. It has a homoerotic scene. There are people who got up from the cinema and left. Just like the first time we staged Vagina Monologue in Nigeria. Back then they were not calling it V Monologue. They were still calling it the proper name Vagina Monologue. There were audiences who left. So I think that this is also the film you watch. I see the beginning transition of filmmakers and towards trying to handle controversial subject matter in a Nigerian film. So within this regard, I tried not to judge this filmmaker so strictly. So I think that actually within the situation, the context he was working in, he tried to make a good job out of what he could. So in that aspect, so I kind of like the film a little. So not because it does not correspond to my temperament. So I don't make comedy. I don't watch them too. So
yeah. Okay. Just to maybe close it off with and emphasize one of the points that you were making. Gilroy's motivation in coining the Black Atlantic concept was to move beyond a rigid nation-state conception of cultural space and cultural practice, which, I would say this is a film that shows us that we have to move beyond those kind of national culture silos or any attempt to organize African culture according to old European projections from the 19th century. And what's remarkable about this film is that you cannot accuse it of just trying to imitate an American template. It is a creative appropriation and reformulation of American templates, but African sources, and it really something new comes out of it. I would say not unlike the recent phase of Afrobeats. Burna Boy once used the metaphor of the pizza. He said Afrobeats is the dough, and then we take ingredients from all over the world and put them on top. And basically, Afrobeat is a pizza with everything and everything on top. But the basic structure is always there, which is a rhythm that actually, in which the Black Atlantic comes full circle because it's a Caribbean rhythm that was re-imported into Africa. Dak, 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 dak. That's a Brazil. That's an Afro-Caribbean pattern that was sort of re-imported into Africa, and in a way that this film is very similar to that, I would say. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it at that. Thank you so much, Tunde. Thank you so much, Didi. This has been great. Thank you all for your questions and comments.